Picture mid-19th century Manhattan, a city booming with commerce, immigrants, and chaos. From the docks to the Five Points, the streets were crowded, muddy, and loud. Pickpockets worked alongside oyster sellers. Street kids darted between horse carts. And in the background, you could always sense the looming threat of gangs. But here's something people forget. The gangs didn't just battle each other, they battled for, and often with, the police. In fact, for decades, New York's law enforcement wasn't protecting the streets from gangs. Very often, they were the gangs. This is the story of how street gangs and political machines built so much influence over the constables, marshals, and eventually police forces of New York that law enforcement sometimes took their orders from the criminals themselves. Corruption, bribery, brash brawls, and outright collusion, it all collided in 19th century Manhattan. Before the official NYPD existed, New York relied on a ragged patchwork of night watchmen, constables, and marshals. These weren't trained professionals, they were part-time, often political appointees, ill-equipped for the growing violence of the city. By the 1820s and 1830s, gangs like the 40 Thieves and later the Bowery Boys and Dead Rabbits quickly realized you didn't have to fear the watchmen. You could buy them. In fact, night watchmen were notorious for sleeping on the job, ignoring crime, or looking the other way if slipped a coin. For immigrant gangs, this meant protection. For political gangs like the Bowery Boys, it meant using the watchmen as muscle to intimidate rivals. Law and order was for sale. Politics, Tammany Hall, and the gang connection. No understanding of police corruption in New York is complete without mentioning Tammany Hall, the mighty democratic political machine. By mid-century, Tammany dominated city politics by mobilizing Irish immigrant votes. But getting votes meant controlling street-level power, so Tammany made friends with the gangs. The Dead Rabbits, the Roach Guards, and other Five Points gangs provided muscle on Election Day. Stuffing ballot boxes, intimidating know-nothing voters, and safeguarding Democratic rallies. In exchange, they enjoyed protection from arrests, and some were rewarded with jobs as watchmen, constables, or on the new police force itself. The Bowery Boys, rivals aligned with nativist politics, had their own political allies. When fights broke out at polling places, the line between street gang riot and political demonstration completely dissolved. The creation of the NYPD, 1845, and why it didn't help. By 1845, New York created a centralized police force, the very beginning of the NYPD, to handle mounting crime and disorder. Officers now wore badges and somewhat standardized uniforms. But instead of eliminating corruption, the police became yet another battlefield. Appointments to the new force weren't based on merit. They were political favors. If you supported the right candidate, or if your gang worked on behalf of Tammany Hall, you could find yourself sworn in as an officer. Imagine it. Yesterday, you were running with the Dead Rabbits. Today, you're wearing a badge. And nothing changed in between except your coat. Soon, fights broke out between rival police gangs themselves. The infamous Police Riot of 1857 saw the old municipal police, loyal to Mayor Fernando Wood, physically battle the newly state-mandated Metropolitan Police. Officers by the hundreds brawled in the streets like rival gangs in uniform. Gangs on the payroll. Perhaps the clearest demonstration of gang police collusion was on the waterfront. Docks bustled with valuable cargo, and gangs like the Daybreak Boys or the Patsy Conroys made fortunes raiding ships. Police were supposed to stop them, but instead, many police captains took cuts of stolen goods. The ship captains knew the rules. Unless you paid for police protection, your cargo was vulnerable. In some cases, the gangs themselves were the police protection. Crooked officers steered dock business straight into the hands of underworld bosses, while honest merchants complained bitterly about organized plunder. Ordinary citizens in Five Points or the Bowery knew the police were not impartial. If you were poor, especially if you were Irish, arrests for drunkenness or disorder were routine. But if you belonged to the right gang with the right connections, you walked free. Police stations doubled as gang hangouts. Captains collected weekly bribes from saloon keepers, brothel operators, gambling dens, and even from rival gang leaders. In short, at mid-century, the police department was one of the most efficient fundraising arms for Tammany Hall. Chapter 6. The Dead Rabbits Riot Revisited, 1857. The infamous Dead Rabbits Riot of 1857 reveals just how compromised the police were. When thousands of Dead Rabbits and Bowery Boys clashed over control of Bayard Street, the police were called in, but they could not act effectively. Dozens of eyewitnesses noted that officers often stood by, pretending they were powerless. Some even cheered on their gang-aligned friends. The result was a massive 2-day riot leaving multiple people dead, dozens wounded, and property destroyed. If the police had been impartial, order might have been restored quickly. But because they were politically and socially entangled, the city descended into chaos. Chapter 7. The Draft Riots, 1863, and the ultimate failure. If any event exposed the collapse of police authority to gang violence, it was the New York Draft Riots of July, 1863. Triggered by anger at the Civil War Draft, thousands of working-class New Yorkers, many Irish, rioted. For 4 days, mobs torched homes, attacked African Americans, looted businesses, and murdered in the streets. The police fought bravely in some cases, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Gangs organized much of the violence, looting stores and targeting rivals. Some police officers actively participated or looked the other way. In the end, federal troops, not the NYPD, had to restore order. Form, but slow and bloody. By the late 19th century, outrage and reform efforts slowly chipped away at corruption. Reformers protested. Journalists exposed corruption, and honest officers demanded change. But progress was hard. Even in the 1870s, 1880s, captains like Alexander Clubber Williams grew rich through bribes from brothels. Gangs still had hooks deep into police politics. Not until the progressive era of the early 20th century did meaningful reform really begin. But the shadow of the gangs controlling the police in the 1800s cast a long mark over the city's history. Who watches the watchman? So, when we ask, who controlled New York in the mid-1800s, the police or the gangs? The unsettling truth is, they often controlled each other. Gangs became police became gangsters, and both answered to politicians at Tammany Hall. For the citizens of Five Points or the Bowery, there was little distinction between the man stealing your wallet on the corner and the man wearing the blue coat of the law. And that is how street gangs controlled the police in 19th century New York.